Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 21 of the Strokecast. Wow, this thing now actually feels real. As Emilee said in last week's episode, no one plans to have a stroke. When it happens, it's scary, it's confusing, your world is turned upside down, and for those around the stroke survivor, their world is turned upside down as well. Suddenly there are all sorts of new financial considerations, new roles and responsibilities in the family to keep in mind, and all of these other things. It's a very tumultuous time, and all of this happens very quickly. And there are so many doctors and nurses and therapists to meet in those first few days. I see a lot of survivors and caregivers asking questions online in various support groups. So with this episode, I hope I can just give some answers about what happens in those first few days from a very high level. This certainly won't be a comprehensive list of everything you need to know, but when this suddenly happens, perhaps this episode can be a good first place to start. First and most importantly, though, I don't know you, and I don't know your loved one, and I don't know their stroke. Every stroke is different. If something I say contradicts the doctor or your medical team, listen to the doctor or your medical team. It's okay to ask them questions, and if I raise questions for you to follow up with them, that's fine. But remember, they are the experts. I'm just a guy on the internet with a background in marketing. As I said, this is going to be just a high-level overview of things you may encounter or may want to know. That said, if you are a caregiver, first, breathe. You're going through a lot with your new role, and it's a role you probably never even planned on. And it's not one you really had a lot of time to think about. Right now, there's a ton to do, and there's a ton to learn. Make sure you get some rest, because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of your loved ones. So let's take a look at what's happening when a stroke happens. First thing to keep in mind is that the brain has now been damaged. Parts of it may be stunned, parts of the brain may be dead. If it was an ischemic stroke, or one that involved a clot, and you got care fast enough, and other things went just right, then that stroke may have been treated with TPA, a clot-busting drug that breaks up blood clots throughout the body, or a thrombectomy, where essentially a wire is run up through the thigh into the brain and then is used to extract the clot. Now, if either of these two treatments have happened, recovery can be faster and shorter due to less long-term damage for the brain. But of course, it is not guaranteed, and each of these treatments have their own risks. Generally, the clot buster can only be administered within 4.5 to 6 hours after the onset of symptoms. The thrombectomy can potentially be done up to about 24 hours after symptoms first appear. But of course, those two treatments can only be done at specific medical centers as well. It's why being fast is so important. And of course, if the stroke is caused by a hemorrhagic incident, a bleed instead of a clot, neither of those two treatments will apply. Also coming right on the heels of an ischemic stroke, in the hospital, the doctors may take the survivor off of blood pressure medication to actually keep the blood pressure higher. Now, normally high blood pressure can lead to stroke. It's one of the main things that leads to strokes. But in the immediate aftermath of a clot-based stroke, what they want to do is perfuse the brain. They want to get more blood flowing to more parts of the brain to minimize any damage. Regardless of the cause or the treatments, the brain is now traumatized. Parts of it may have been starved of nutrients or suffocated from lack of oxygen. It's likely swollen. Parts of it may have been drowned by blood in a hemorrhagic stroke. It may have had a stick into it as part of a thrombectomy, which is totally unexpected for the brain. It's now in a new environment as recovery continues in a hospital or an emergency room. It's trying to assess just what the hell is going on here. Some of its systems have gone offline. Parts of it have gone dark. It may have lost track of certain limbs. It may have lost memory, may have lost control of other parts of the body. It may take hours or days or weeks to know the full extent of what happened. And this is one of those areas where you have to be cautious, because perhaps you've known somebody else who's had a stroke, or a friend or relative knows somebody else who's had a stroke and is telling you everything that is absolutely going to happen. But the thing is, every stroke is going to be different. It's going to vary based on the part of the brain that was damaged, how extensive that damage is, how long that damaging incident took, as well as the condition of the brain and the body pre-stroke. People may temporarily misplace, and I like to say temporarily misplaced instead of lose, because with treatment, folks can often get many of these things back. But they may temporarily misplace speech, language, motion or control over their arms or legs, swallowing, other aspects of the body. It is really going to depend and vary widely based on all sorts of different factors. So no two strokes are going to be identical. One thing that is very common after stroke, though, is that sleep becomes more important than ever. We often think of sleep as just being downtime when we do nothing, but that's really not what's happening. Sleep is sort of like when they shut down the highway at night for road work. They don't just shut it down to give the road a break. They shut it down so that now there's an opportunity to rip up the pavement, dig big holes, rebuild things, repaint things, and sort of restructure it so that it can make for a better route down the road. And that's what's happening in sleep. The brain is actually continuing to work. It's continuing to rebuild. It's getting rid of junk. It's cleaning stuff out. It's building new connections. It's solidifying more data. Post-stroke, the brain is in a panic recovery mode, sort of like even when Geordi LaForge on the Starship Enterprise has to take the warp core offline for repairs. Sometimes you do have to take parts of the brain offline, i.e. go to sleep, in order to actually do all of those repairs. Even when awake in a hospital and not yet into therapy, the survivor is not just lying there doing nothing. The brain is still trying to rebuild connections. It's processing the new environment and this new reality. Being awake post-stroke is tiring. The brain is busy making all these plans for renovation and rerouting connections and rebuilding things. And that takes a ton of energy and a ton of resources. And there's less energy and less resources there to begin with. So sleep becomes so important to deal with all of this. Another thing that many survivors have to deal with are challenges with sensory processing. We may think that it's going to be helpful to have the support of all the friends and relatives around the bed and everybody there to show how much they care and how much that person is in their thoughts. Is that really going to be helpful? Well, maybe. It's going to depend on the stroke. You see, one of the functions of the human brain is to reject stimuli. It's to reject all sorts of things that go through our minds. If you're in a quiet room right now, are you really? Because if you focus on the other things that you can hear, you may very well hear a refrigerator running, or a TV going on in the background, or the hum of a computer fan, or traffic penetrating the windows from outside. What about touch? Are you not touching anything? What about the air on your face? If you think about it, can you feel that 14 pounds per square inch of air pressing against your skin? Can you feel the weight of glasses against your nose if you wear glasses? Or perhaps that fabric of that shirt on your shoulder? Think about vision. Think about the things that you don't focus on. You may think you're only looking at one thing, but that's really just what you're paying attention to. In your field of vision are still all of these other objects, all of these colors, all of these shapes, all of this motion, all of that data from all of those senses is always coming into your brain. And your brain has to process it and then reject the vast majority of that perception data. It wants to process only what you're focusing on. If you couldn't reject almost all of that data, what would you experience? just an impossible cacophony of sound and sight and feeling that would just be irritating and stress you out and be just impossible to deal with. Processing all of that takes precious energy. And in some cases, the stroke has damaged the part of the brain that filters that out. So a survivor may have limited ability to actually filter data. And all of a sudden, all that stuff is still coming into their brain. And that is loud, and it's obnoxious, and it's annoying. Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, in her book, My Stroke of Insight, talked about this experience. This is one of the effects of her stroke. To the point where having all these people around you, it was just more tiring and caused more pain. It was more disruptive than anything else. So should all of those visitors and should the TV be running and should all of this stuff be happening around your survivor? Maybe. The key is to listen to the stroke survivor and not just listen to what they say with their words, especially if they don't have words, but listen to their nonverbals as well. How do they respond when there's a lot of stimulus? How do they respond when there's a lot of people? And take your directive from that response. Something else that we see in support groups from time to time is the fear that their loved one is broken, especially if they were perceived as being a very emotionally strong and together person who was able to take everything in stride, and now they start crying. That can be very scary for folks. But here's the thing, with stroke, it's just perfectly normal. It's called PBA, or Pseudobulbar Affect. It's also known as emotional lability. Garrett actually talked about his experience with it back in episode 7 of Strokecast. Basically, this involves laughing or crying at inappropriate times, with the slightest provocation. That crying may sometimes be wailing. It may seem forlorn. That may be triggered by a simple TV commercial or thinking about somebody else in their life or all sorts of other things. It may seem like the depths of sadness, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what it is. Even after my stroke, I contended with crying even when I wasn't sad. It did manage to scare the girlfriend a bit because emotionally I tend to lean towards the robotic. But it just felt good even when there was no sadness behind it. You know, sometimes it would just involve thinking about Captain Janeway ramming the Voyager into that Krenim ship in the Star Trek Voyager story, The Year of Hell, or the departures of the various doctors on Doctor Who. Or sometimes it would just be caused by exerting myself in PT, in physical therapy. Within a couple of weeks, mine had pretty much faded. And sometimes this does last for weeks, and for some folks it can last for years. There are medications that can help. Regardless, it doesn't mean that the survivor is broken or that they're a shell of the person they used to be. This is just something that's normal and it's common among stroke survivors. After stroke, recovery does begin immediately, and it can be ongoing. It may not be fast or easy, but the brain works hard to build new connections and route around the damage. Popular wisdom may sometimes say that you have 6 or 12 months, but it's not true. Recovery doesn't stop at 6 months or 12 months if you don't stop working on it. An action-oriented attitude is the key to getting function back even years later. Survivors you see posting in support groups will tell you they got functionality back 2, 4, 5, 6, 10 years later. Things come back online as the brain is able to reroute those connections. But you got to do the work. You got to try things and fail and try again. And you got to do successful things thousands of times. And you got to work with your team, the therapists, the doctors, the caregivers. Talk with other survivors. Find a local group. Find an online support group. Connect with others who are going through this. More than 800,000 Americans have a stroke every year. You're unique, but you're not alone. And that brings us to our hack of the week. This week, let's talk about Dyson. This magic material is a favorite of occupational therapists around the world. It's a rubbery plastic material that feels sticky, but it has no adhesive. Basically, it's just a high friction material that is great for keeping things in place. Where this is most important for me is when I'm eating yogurt at my coffee table at home, because those small containers, as soon as I put a spoon in it, start sliding around. And with the full use of only one hand, I can't really hold the yogurt container still while I poke it with the spoon. But what I can do is lay down a piece of Dicem. I usually use one that's about 8 inches square. And I lay that on the table, and it won't move on the table. I put the yogurt container on the Dicem sheet, and the yogurt container won't move around. And it's great for keeping other plates and bowls and just other things in place. I imagine I could even use it in my car to keep my cell phone from sliding around on the dashboard or something like that. It's a great material. It's also reusable, so you don't throw it out after you use it. You just put it away and then take it out again when you want to use it. If it starts to lose its stickiness, simply wash it with soap and water, let it dry, and you can keep on using it. You can actually order it by the roll off of Amazon. Just go to strokecast.com/Dicem, DYCEM, in order to get to that page. And that's actually my affiliate link there. You can find it in other places as well. And you can probably find it in a lot of medical supply places, or if you get a catalog of OT supplies. When you do cut a piece off this roll, I found that it's better to cut a bigger piece than you think you're going to need, because that way it will stick better to the surface like the table. It just gives it more surface area to grab. And of course, if you value how it looks, if you like it to be more decorative, you can actually choose your favorite colors. It comes in a wide variety of colors. I just went with the simple black roll. But you can also get yellow and red and blue and all sorts of other things. Another idea is to actually go ahead and take a pair of fabric scissors or fancy paper scissors, and you can actually use it to cut patterns into it. So make it sort of like a doily, or I suppose you could even sort of make Dicem snowflakes out of it for the winter if you wanted to. Though I think that would be wasting a little bit of Dicem, but you can make it look great and give you some nice practical advantages of less stuff sliding around. So that's it for this week. What was your early stroke experience like? What would have been helpful to know sooner? Let us know in the comments over at strokecast.com/newstroke. Consider picking up a roll of Dicem for yourself. Just go to strokecast.com/Dicem, and you'll also find that link over at strokecast.com/newstroke. If you find this episode helpful, please share it with someone else who might benefit from it, either in the real world or online. Just send them the link to strokecast.com/newstroke. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you next week.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.